ride. You think it's real, it's just a rhyme. We can change it any turn we want. It's only a choice between fear and love. Ride goes up and down, round and round. It has thrills and chills, and it's very brightly colored. Up and down, round and round, and it's very loud. Don't worry, don't be afraid, it's just a ride. We can change it any turn we want. It's only a choice between fear and love. Why are we here?
I think we're part of a greater wisdom than we will ever understand. A higher order. Call it what you want. Know what I call it? The big electron. The big electron. The big electron. It doesn't punish, doesn't reward. It doesn't judge at all. It just is, and so are we. For a little while. The ride goes up, down, round and round. It has thrills and chills, and it's very brightly colored. Up and down, round and round, and it's very loud. Don't worry, don't be afraid, it's just a ride. And we can change it any turn we want. It's only a choice between fear and love. The big electron. It doesn't punish, doesn't reward. It doesn't judge at all. It just is, and so are we. For a little while.
Greetings, programs. Welcome to Red Pill Sunday School on this fine, what are we in, October? Oh man, it's already October. Where are we at? We're in October the 8th, 2017. Wow, I just going by so quick now, isn't it? Well, we suppose the news of the day, or the news of the week, continuing saga of Las Vegas and the shooting, or the apparent shooting. We're all, of course, constantly looking at things that make it appear to be, well, you know, what do you say? It either happened or it didn't happen, or it happened as a staged event, or it actually really happened. It's you know, in these days, in these times where 1984 has become a reality, it's very difficult to to believe anything you see. The only thing that I can offer, and it seems like I always revert to this, whenever anything like this happens, is to just go back and read some excerpts from a little document, refuted document, in fact, one that cannot be officially sourced. A little report called the Report from Iron Mountain. Now, whatever your opinion of this report, and whatever your opinion of the Protocols of Zion, and whatever your opinion of all of these different, the letter that to Muzzini from the famous Mason Pike, you know, whether they are legitimate or not, seems to be a more important question than why are they so damned accurate. Now, the reason I like to just revert to, instead of myself, you know, there's plenty of evidence out there. Yeah, just to name a few of the things, of course. One, they just happen to be having a terror drill, same as every other place that has these kind of incidents. Just happen to be having a terror drill with the same exact model. You find the same advertisements for actors for a big event in Las Vegas, paid actors. You know, $1,200 a day or whatever. And you find, you know, all these different things that just, you know, oh, look, there's a fourth floor shooter. Oh, there's a second shooter, a third shooter. There's so many things. But for the most part, the one question I hear from whatever your opinion is, and that's really all we have, our opinions, because we weren't there, we don't have the facts, and so I like to be, neutral about this. I like to say I don't know, but what I do know is that you always have to ask why, because that's the biggest question. Why does this stuff happen? Why is it? What benefit could government have, for instance, for staging such events? What benefit? Why would they do such a thing? Well, again, the 1984 model makes it pretty obvious why. The continuous war against the fictionally drawn up enemy. It's a classic tale. I think. I think we should admit that most of the enemies that we're taught are our enemies are not. Why terrorists, for instance, are bombing their own people instead of us doesn't really make that much sense. But okay, we're supposed to believe that in order to somehow harm America, in the name of Allah, we're going to drive into a group of our own people and bomb them, and somehow that harms America. Somehow that's a terrorist act against America. Okay, I don't get it, but, if you can sell it to a bunch of stupid Americans, well then, more power to you. Why, though, would anyone stage any of these events, from the movie theater to the nightclub to Las Vegas? Why, oh why, is the question. It's the question asked on any side, no matter what side. It's always, and the question, of course, is why? Why would a man so wealthy, etc., get up and ruin his life and do this? Why? Well, okay, but why would government do it? How do you justify saying it didn't happen? And that's where I always revert back to the report from Iron Mountain, not because I say it's a legitimate document or an illegitimate document, but because it's self-evident. The reasons stated for what you might call the necessity of displaying on the media 24/7 public executions. Why do we need media coverage of public executions? Why is that so important? Why was it so important to constantly have a streaming live television report of war going on in the 1984 novel? Why is it so important to pipe a constant fear level and show these horrible things, these public executions, in peacetime? And so I go back to my blog, and when I originally put this up, it was actually for the Boston bombing, and it was entitled just that. What is the reason why public executions are needed in peacetime? Why do we need to televise them? Well, let's read a little bit from this, and we'll perhaps get an idea of just why this is happening. Why either it's, whether it's real, whether it's actually happening, whether people are dying, or whether people aren't dying and it's all a big staged event. Either way, it doesn't really matter. That's the scary part. Whether they do it for real or they do it fake, it doesn't matter, because the same purpose, the same point, the same agenda is being served. And that's why I sit here and I say, I don't know, and I'm comfortable with saying I don't know, because I know the agenda. Now, it's times like these, and I'm so excited, so happy that I have cataloged so much information on my blog and in my, just all around, in my big, huge documents and everything. Just a massive collection of information. So I'm actually going to read what I wrote in this blog. Again, the title was Boston Bombing, the Importance of Public Executions in Peacetime. Now, again, this is right out of the Orwellian consciousness here. The report's subtitle, that is the report from Iron Mountain. The report's subtitle is on the possibility and desirability of peace. Though the personal perspective of the report's author is one of psychopathic control by force-induced Orwellian quasi-peace through the threat of violence, the continuous threat of violence. It is a carefully thought-out plan created in the 1950s, think tanks lying out the most perfectly devious ideas on social control through government-induced terrorism imaginable. So plausibly insane are these historically accurate suggestions that until you realize they describe exactly what is happening all around us today, you can hardly believe they've all but come to fruition. There was one aspect of a report from Iron Mountain that particularly struck me and stuck with me over the past decade or so from when I first read it. This was the concept of purposefully created and implemented spectacles of public executions by government and its think tanks and secretive military apparatus. The report continuously focuses on the state of peace in the population, kept specifically by creating the continuous fear of and simulation of terror attacks and war. In this current stage, as i.e. all the world's a stage, the public promotion and media publicizing of these events, like that of the recent Boston Marathon bombing, we can just replace the Las Vegas, what's their name, massacre? The steady string of school shootings, the hanging of Saddam Hussein, the U.S. soldiers getting their heads chopped off in supposedly an Arab country that is actually a green screen, 9/11, Waco, any other violence and graphic scenes are implemented and delivered into the minds of the population through the media, streaming everywhere in the world. And ultimately, this is considered necessary to maintain the peace by keeping the constant fear of war and terrorism in the forefront of the peaceful people. What's the catchphrase? Oh, well, we got to keep it in other countries so that it doesn't come home. So we go and we harm a lot of other people in other countries, call them terrorists, and so that we're safe at home. Yeah, that's just brilliant. Of course, this process must also be blamed by government on some outside or foreign enemy. The false ideology of unknown terrorism and terrorists all around us that can strike at any time. Even the environment and the weather are the weapons of future control in the report from Iron Mountain. I suggest you get the report. The report concludes that only in the past has war been the only reliable means to achieve peace at home, theorizing that only during times of war, or the threat of war, are the people compliant enough to tolerate the whims and tyrannies of government without complaint or just outright revolt. The perpetual fear of invasion and a random, unpredictable attack every once in a while by an unseen enemy instills a sense of duty to obey and accept nationalist efforts to secure the borders defensively by striking offensively. Brilliant. No matter how morally, ethically, or constitutionally wrong those efforts, or how many millions of women and children are killed, random violence creates a tool to promote nationalistic feelings of patriotism, where no amount of vile human rights violations and retaliatory sacrifice for the act of self-induced terror will be rejected by the public at large. To rally against and protest this national fervor, to kill for revenge, to maintain the peace, is made to seem like treason by the masses of the population. And for that nationalistic herd mentality to be accepted and continued even during times of peace, this presentation of false flag terrorism and violence must be kept fresh. You gotta keep hitting the refresh button, right? New story at 9. The world's ending tonight at 8. News story at 9. Yeah, terrorism and violence must be kept fresh and exciting as a public spectacle often enough to keep instilled in the people that the homeland must be defended without question at all times. For in times of peace and prosperity, without the constant flashes of TV monitors and graphic print media propaganda, the people will inevitably begin to ask why. Why such organized homeland security is necessary. Why is the violation of their natural and political rights necessary or even warranted without such events? They'll eventually they'll eventually resent higher taxes, and the bureaucracy of government's legal organized efforts to extort as much money as possible from the public for military purposes, for homeland security purposes, without some threat from an outside enemy. How can you possibly ask for more and more and more and give nothing unless you have that outside enemy to defend against, right? They'll even accept the unreasonable paradigm that food, water, and natural resource shortages are the result of this illusion of terror. In peacetime, respect is lost for public leaders, which leads to social breakdown of the continuity and control of government. Of course, organized crime is very difficult when things are good, when things are prosperous. You need something to hide your crime behind. But with violence comes a false sense of respect out of perceived necessity. Just as any person would temporarily respect a robber who required their wallet at gunpoint. Indeed, no past government or civilization has overcome the deterioration and self-awareness of the masses that comes with the establishment of actual peace. Thus, to stabilize society, the report from Iron Mountain concludes that the perpetual threat of perceived war, attack, and violence at home is paramount to the continuity of government. Now that was my little squeeze on it, but let's actually read from the report here. On page 39, here's what it says. The war system not only has been essential to the existence of nations as independent political entities, but has been equally indispensable to their stable political structure. Without it, no government has ever been able to obtain acquiescence in its legitimacy or right to rule its society. Without what? Without the war system. This is why, in Orwellian speak, war is peace. You get it? Oh, now it makes sense. The perpetual threat of war, showing war constantly, public executions on the television makes peace. What is peace? Peace is nothing more, nothing less than continued commerce. You pay your taxes, you pay your fees, you know, every dollar that you spend goes back to government in triplicate. You're in debt to the hilt. You're completely underwater. And every person owes how much to the national debt, which is not even calculable anymore. If I say one number in a split second, it'll go up by $1 billion or some crazy shit like that. Anyway, without the war system, the perception of imminent war, no government has ever been able to obtain acquiescence in its legitimacy or right to rule its society. The possibility of war provides the sense of external necessity, without which no government can long remain in power. The historical record reveals one instance after another where the failure of a regime to maintain the credibility of a war threat led to its dissolution by the forces of private interest or reactions to social injustice or of other disintegrative elements. The organization of society for the possibility of war is its principal political stabilizer. It has enabled societies to maintain necessary class distinctions, and it has ensured the subordination of the citizens to the state by virtue of the residual war powers inherent in the concept of nationhood. Now, perhaps even greater a threat, if we start to think about this, is what they're calling homegrown terror. A great way to get rid of people like me who see right through their systems, their war system, who see their illegitimacy and their desperate plight to keep themselves legitimate, to keep their spending and their organized crime legitimate in the eyes of the people, the common people, who otherwise might stop and consider the war crimes they commit on a daily basis everywhere around the world, including here. Remember, we pay our taxes to pay the salaries of the police who tase and club and put their boots upon our faces. Yes, we pay for that. That's our protection. That is to protect and serve. Now, report explains on page 39 just how peace and control can be maintained through continuous planned and publicized public executions, such as we're seeing in Las Vegas. Whether it's real or not doesn't really matter. It serves a purpose. Public executions of innocents by perceived terrorists for social organization. Now again, we are at the point in the history of this country where it doesn't matter. We're gonna call terrorists, whether they're white, Christian, or does that mean supremacist? Oh, I'm not sure anymore. Or whether it's an Arab, or whether it's a black guy or a white guy. It doesn't really matter anymore, because at this point, they've got you all convinced that terrorists are everywhere, right? That they're homegrown. So I mean, really, you can't go wrong with these scheduled terrorists shootings, these public executions. And here's what it says, okay? Perceived terrorists for social organization. Here it goes. In general, the war system provides the basic motivation for primary social organization. In other words, organization by continuous fear. In so doing, it reflects on the societal level the incentives of individual human behavior. The most important of these, for social purposes, is the individual psychological rationale for allegiance to a society and its values. Allegiance requires a cause. A cause requires an enemy. This much is obvious. The critical point is that the enemy that defines the cause must seem genuinely formidable. Roughly speaking, the presumed power of the enemy, sufficient to warrant an individual sense of allegiance to a society, must be proportionate to the size and complexity of the society. Today, of course, that power must be one of unprecedented magnitude and frightfulness. It follows from the patterns of human behavior that the credibility of a social enemy, quote-unquote, demands similarly a readiness of response in proportion to its menace. In a broad social context, an eye for an eye still characterizes the only acceptable attitude towards a presumed threat of aggression, despite contrary religious and moral precepts governing personal conduct. In other words, ignore the duties of natural law. We're at war, or the threat of it. It continues. It says, the remoteness of personal decision from social consequence in a modern society makes it easy for its members to maintain this attitude without being aware of it. Again, without being aware of it. Now, I find this interesting because I constantly, just over and over, on every radio show that I listen to, and I can hardly stand to listen to any of the crap on the radio anymore, they started piping Alex Jones in on the local AM station, which just really just pisses me off. But you know, what can you do? It's a moneymaker. That's all they're interested in. So what I don't understand, and this is kind of what this is getting at, is what the allegiance. Why do we have allegiance to the United States? Right? Allegiance to your state, understandable. Allegiance to the States United, a compact where each state would protect the other state from any foreign government, including the United States. Yeah, that's understandable. But wait a minute. What happens when you take the Declaration of Independence and you replace the word king or replace the word England with the word United States or the word president? You find that the things that the United States is doing not only to each state, as in the States United, but also to countries around the world are 10 times worse than anything that was complained about in the Declaration of Independence. How does the United States continue to legitimize itself in the eyes of the states, i.e. the private people, and its common citizenry, most importantly, the plebes, the goyim that are citizens of the United States? How do you keep that citizenship? Well, obviously through benefits, through Social Security, etc. But most importantly, through what we're talking about here, this continuous false flag or real, doesn't matter, event, this continuous violence, this continuous 1984-esque, televised public execution. All right, without even being aware of it. So people are complaining all the time. Oh, that government's going to do this, government's going to do that, and then in the next breath they say, "God bless America." And I'm so confused, and they wave the flag of the United States. The war flag, by the way, that is a war flag. It is a flag a commercial flag, and it signifies war. The actual peace flag is a flag that has vertical stripes, not horizontal. You can look that up for yourself. All right, because war is peace. Peace is war. Commerce is peace. A recent example. Going back to the report, a recent example is the war in Vietnam. A less recent one was the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In each case, the extent and gratuitousness of the slaughter were abstracted into political formulae by most Americans. Once the proposition that the victims were quote-unquote enemies, that flattering title, once that was established, then, hey, it was okay. The war system and our government, we can give fealty to our government because it protected us by completely wiping out another people. The war system makes such an abstracted response possible in non-military context as well. A conventional example of this non-military mechanism is the inability of most people to connect, let us say, the starvation of millions in India with their own past conscious political decision-making. Yet the sequential logic linking a decision to restrict grain production in America with an eventual famine in Asia is obvious, unambiguous, and unconcealed. But you see, it takes someone like me, or some of the other great guests here on UCY.TV to, or any of you listening, to actually uncover what is unconcealed, what is unambiguous, and what is so completely obvious. How about when the farmers in India were drinking Monsanto's poisonous... God, they were killing themselves because their crops didn't grow, because they trusted in America's seeds from Monsanto. And when they couldn't produce, they drank the poison, they drank the Roundup. In a show of absolute, what do you call that? If that doesn't get to you, what will? Right? I mean, wow. What gives the war system its preeminent role in social organization, as elsewhere, is its unmatched authority over life and death. It must be emphasized again that the war system is not a mere social extension of the presumed need for individual human violence, but itself, in turn, serves to rationalize most non-military killing. Non-military killing. Does that sound familiar? How do we rationalize this non-military killing? In other words, public executions in peacetime. It also provides the precedent for the collective willingness of members of a society to pay a blood price for institutions far less central to social organization than war. To take a handy example, rather than accept speed limits of 20 miles an hour, we prefer to let automobiles kill 40,000 people a year. A Rand analysis puts it in more general terms and thus rhetorically, quote, I am sure that there is, in effect, a desirable level of automobile accidents. Desirable, that is, from a broad point of view, in the sense that it is a necessary concomitant of things of greater value to society. The point may seem too obvious for iteration, but it is essential to an understanding of the important motivational function of war as a model for collective sacrifice. A brief look at some defunct pre-modern societies is instructive. One of the most noteworthy features, common to the larger, more complex, and more successful of ancient civilizations, was their widespread use of the blood sacrifice. If one were to limit consideration to those cultures whose regional hegemony was so complete that the prospect of war had become virtually inconceivable, as was the case with several of the great pre-Columbian societies of the Western Hemisphere, it would be found that some form of ritual killing occupied a position of paramount social importance in each one. Invariably, the ritual was invested with mythic or religious significance, as will all religious and totemic practice. However, the ritual masked a broader and more important social function. In these societies, the blood sacrifice served the purpose of maintaining a vestigial earnest of the society's capability and willingness to make war, i.e., kill and be killed, in the event that some mystical, i.e., unforeseen circumstance were to give rise to the possibility that the earnest was not an adequate substitute for genuine military organization when the unthinkable enemy, such as the Spanish conquistadors, actually appeared on the scene, in no way negates the function of the ritual. It was primarily, if not exclusively, a symbolic reminder that war had once been the central organizing force of the society, and this condition might recur. It does not follow that a transition to total peace in modern societies would require the use of this model, even in less barbaric guise. But the historical analogy serves as a reminder that a viable substitute for war as a social system cannot be a mere symbolic charade. It must involve risk of real personal destruction, and on a scale consistent with the size and complexity of modern social systems. Credibility is the key. I'll say that again. Credibility is the key. Why do the news stations all have the same story, the same information, the same media packets, interviewing the same people? Because credibility is key. And as long as nobody's watching the alternative media out here who are yelling from the top of our lungs, this was not real, this was staged, this was planned, they were having a terror drill with the exact same description, and they got there the day before it started. You know, they put ads in the newspaper, they hired actors, the same actors were there from other, how many facts do you have to put across But how do you also justify that those facts aren't being mentioned in any substantial way at all, except for maybe the occasional newscaster stating the fact that, wow, that sounds like 2 machine guns. That's I was in New York for 9/11. I remember the first thing that those people said on the news when they didn't have their media packets yet. They weren't all in consensus yet. They weren't, these paid CIA agents of the media and Operation Blackbird. They were all saying, well, gee, doesn't look like there was a plane crash there. Doesn't look like I don't see any parts. Look at the Pentagon. There's no plane. Where's the plane parts? Right? Then all of a sudden, of course, a day later, well, Osama bin Laden did this, even though Osama bin Laden said wholeheartedly he did not. Again, credibility is key. Continuing with the report here. Whether the substitute is... Now, listen to this, folks. This is telling you're asking why. Why would they do this? Whether the substitute is ritual in nature or functionally substantive, in other words, a real event, unless it provides a believable life and death threat, it will not serve the socially organizing function of war. The existence of an accepted external menace, then, is essential to social cohesiveness as well as to acceptance of political authority. The menace must be believable. It must be of a magnitude consistent with the complexity of the society threatened, and it must appear at least to infect or affect the entire society. Now, do you really need to ask why anymore? No, you don't. You don't need to ask why. In fact, you should ask, why don't they do it more often? Because you want that spectacle to be shown and piped through people's living rooms all day long and all night long. You want the catchphrases, you want the tweets, you want the word of the day or the prayer of the day or the victim of the day to be shown over and over and over. Because credibility is the key. Repetition guarantees credibility. Not because the repetition of what is being said is correct or verifiable, but because it is repeated. What was it that Lenin said? You say something over and over and people will believe it, right? You tell a lie often enough, they'll accept it as truth. Well, fortunately, my friends, there are people like you who will not accept. And, we will be eventually more and more so persecuted. It is not Christians that will be persecuted. Christians aren't living in truth. It is only those who wish to live in truth, who do not accept propaganda and false events like these, that will be persecuted. And the persecution will come from those brainwashed people. Don't be worried about government guards rushing into your front door. Worry about being shunned by a society that literally needs this. They need to be shown this wartime falsity. They need credibility. They need to know that the fact that they're being extorted in every way possible through taxation, through fees, through grocery stores, through all the corporations of government, through the medical industry, they need to know that it's a legitimate cause, that credibility is happening. They need that. And part of that is exactly what we played the other day, about the boot on the face. Right? That's a metaphor. There's not really a leather boot on your face. That's the metaphor for the public, who now have so many rules and regulations on their side. They have so many rights that have been given to them, which causes so many duties to everyone else that they have that virtual, imaginary feeling that they've got their boots on our faces. Why? Because we can no longer tell the truth and be politically correct at the same time. Truth is not politically correct. To talk about what I am talking about now is not politically correct, yet here it is. Here it is. I'm reading from a report that supposedly is a government report. I can't verify that, but I'm reading it, and I'm, if this doesn't make sense to you, if this doesn't seem pretty self-evident, if you're not recognizing the theme from 1984, if you're not recognizing exactly what's happening around you, being piped through your TV 24/7, then I don't know what to tell you. Come after me. I mean, I know it's difficult to grasp, but even when you look up the word terrorism, which is a relatively new term, it's not a term that was ever used until, the 1990s, when it was rebirthed through the Bush administration. It's truly hard to grasp that government is the terrorist, right? That's the hard part. And yet, when you look at the definition of terrorism in most dictionaries, it used to be anyway, that it would explain that terrorism was something that government did to keep its people in line or to control its people. It was terrorism. That is what terrorism was defined as. Now, I haven't looked lately. I haven't checked out the dictionaries lately to see if that's what it still is defined as, because of course it's so easy to change things on the internet. And yet, we find it hard to believe. Well, it's the very definition of the word, but we still find it hard to believe. Okay. All right. We watch it all over the world, but it's our history. It's the history of England. It's the history of Russia. It's the history of China. It's the history of every nation out there, including our own. Just ask the Indians. Right? I mean, I don't understand. How do you not understand that government is the only terrorist that exists? This, of course, goes back to the whole enterprise operation that government is. What is government? A government service corporation. Doesn't mean it's a government. It's not a legitimate government we're talking about. A legitimate government, of course, is Congress assembled when it's representing the states, i.e. the people. People mean states, not actual people. Right? But when we're talking about the United States, this nation, this Washington, this district, this is a completely different entity. It is foreign to every state. Just like California is foreign to every other state, so is the United States foreign to all the 50 states. I'm sorry, that's in the, you can read about that. That's not me. That's not my opinion. It's very important to understand that. It's very important to understand that makes you a foreigner in any state that you reside in, because you're a United States creation, not a state creation. That's why you don't have the rights. That's why the Constitution doesn't apply to you. And I'll read that sometime here soon, just to make sure you don't think it's just me saying that. Let's go on. I mean, what we're talking about is again, peace, which means commerce, open commerce, where everybody's being taxed. The organized crime of government is taking its share. I mean, that's simple. That's what peace is. There's nothing else. We're not talking about real peace. We're talking about legal peace, political peace. The peace that's spoken of in the Bible, that's love, charity. That's everything completely opposite of what we're talking about here. Okay? At the end of the Iron Mountain Report, we understand, of course, that, really all we are anyway are pawns, each of us, disposable pawns, and, ready victims whenever they need some, whether we're being paid to act as victims or whether we actually are. It says a primary level example of the obvious and long overdue need for such translation is furnished by Kahn in Thinking About the Unthinkable, page 102. Under the heading Some Awkward Choices, he compares 4 hypothetical policies. A certain loss of $3,000, a chance of loss of $300,000, a chance of loss of $30 million, and a 0.001 chance of a loss of $3 billion. I'm sorry, so I should say a certain loss of 3,000, a 0.1% chance of losing 300,000, a 0.01 chance of losing $30 million, and a 0.001 chance of a loss of $3 billion. Okay, that's more accurate. A government decision maker would very likely choose in that order. But what if lives are at stake rather than dollars? That's the question. In thinking about the unthinkable, some awkward choices. Now, if we're going to lose money, the product of America, the product of any nation is money. That's how it makes all its money, is through its money, because all money returns to government eventually. Just like all money returns to the bank at the end of the Monopoly game, same thing. Now, if you don't understand that, by the way, let me explain that for a minute here. Let's say I'm a dollar bill. Hi, my name's Bill. I was just printed off the presses of the United States Mint. Now, the first thing that happens to me as a United States dollar, you call me Bill, is that I have a 52 or 53% what's called a seniorage tax. You can look up that word, seniorage. You'll love it. It's basically all the tax that the Federal Reserve and other agencies tax on the creation of the dollar. So immediately, just by my birth, just by my being created and pressed, and the U.S. Mint, I'm sorry to tell you, but there was already a 53-cent tax, or let's just round it down to 50-cent tax, called seniorage, to pay for all the hard work that the government does to produce me. Again, you can call me Bill. That's Dollar Bill. And guess what? Next thing that happens is I get sent to a bank. And the bank then issues me in some form to a customer. And the customer then goes out and he pays me. And let's just say the customer goes and buys some gas with me. Well, he then gets charged a gas tax. So my first day of my life, I've already been charged for a gas tax, 10%. Well, let me say 10%. So that's another 10 cents that the government earned by my existence. So I'm already up to 60. So I've already lost 60 cents of my value. Now, the next thing that happens is I go and I get used to buy some groceries, and there's a 12% sales tax there, and then I get used to be as a paycheck or cash to be paid to someone else. But of course, when you pay somebody, you got to pay a federal income tax. That's 25%. Oh shit! Yeah, well, all of a sudden I'm only worth $5. I've been taxed in my first day of life as a dollar bill. I've been taxed 95 cents. I've created 95 cents in taxation that goes to government. Damn, I'm good. And that's just the first day of my life. And now that guy goes the next day and he spends me on a cup of coffee. And of course, 7-Eleven charges that tax, and then it just keeps going. And eventually, I mean, think what the hell kind of fortune and taxation I've made is just one single dollar bill for the government in a whole month of my life. I mean, the average dollar bill only lasts a couple of years, right? But I'll tell you, as a bill of the United States, I'm proud to say that I bring in hundreds of dollars of taxation. Now, I don't really understand how it is that taxation actually gets paid for, since I'm producing so much, and all of my brothers and sisters, some of them are worth $20. It's amazing. I don't know how it happens, but government makes a shitload of money off of me. That's the life of dollar bill, man. That's the life of a frickin' dollar. See, every dollar, whether it's credit, whether it's paper, whatever it is, every dollar that is created goes back to government in triplicate plus triplicate infinity. Now, does that make sense to you? Does that really Does that make sense? Does that seem like a viable concept to you? Playing dollar bill, Clint Richardson, thank you, oh, yay! But what if, okay, so, yeah, we have government, we have some awkward choices, if I have the chance of losing, I'm not going to take the chance of losing $3 billion, I'm going to take the chance of losing 3,000, because, I'm a good conservative Republican Christian asshole in Congress. But what if lives are at stake rather than dollars? Now, Kahn suggests that the order of choice would be reversed, although current experience does not support this option. Rational war research can and must make it possible to express, without ambiguity, lives in terms of dollars, and vice versa. The choices need not be and cannot be awkward, he says. In other words, when it comes to making the choice of losing of a certain loss of 3,000 people, a 0.1% chance of a loss of 300,000 people, a 0.01 chance a loss of 30 million people, and a 0.001 chance of loss of 3 billion people, then they would choose the highest. They would say, well, let's do this, even though there's a chance, just that 1.001 chance of the loss of 3 billion people from this planet. Let's do it. Let's do it. It's not money we're talking about. You can't, we, I mean, it's just useless eaters, right? I mean, hell, they actually believe all these false flag events are true. I mean, what use are they? Let's just consider let's take the risk, That's what we're here for. We're gamblers. We're Congress. We cannot consider that an awkward choice. That's what he says. We cannot consider that money is more important than people. Or less important, excuse me. As it goes on, it says, again, an overdue extension of an obvious application of techniques up to now limited such circumscribed purposes as improving kill ammunition ratios, determining local choice between precision and saturation bombing, and other minor tactical and occasionally strategic ends. The slowness of RAND, IDA, and other responsible analytic organizations to extend cost-effectiveness and related concepts beyond early-phase applications has already been widely remarked on and criticized elsewhere. Now, again, we're talking about human capital destruction here. We're talking about people, and they're saying, well, it might be a little more expensive than we want to spend to actually make our bombs more precise, as opposed to just saturation bombing and killing all their children and women and innocent men. Right? We don't want to spend the money to improve our weapons to only kill our target. No. That would be silly. Money is more important. Don't you understand? Moving on, page 53 of the Iron Mountain, where the report from Iron Mountain expounds upon the importance of this Orwellian necessity of war in peace time with regards to the thinking people who unpatriotically oppose this war system. Now let's read what they think about us. All right. It says, another possible surrogate for the control of potential enemies of society is the reintroduction in some form consistent with modern technology and political processes of slavery. Up to now, this has been suggested only in fiction, notably in works of Wells, Huxley, Orwell, and others engaged in the imaginative anticipation of the sociology of the future. But the fantasies projected in Brave New World in 1984 have seemed less and less implausible over the years since their publication. The traditional association of slavery with ancient pre-industrial cultures should not blind us to its adaptability to advanced forms of social organization, nor should its equally traditional incompatibility with Western moral and economic values. It is entirely possible that the development of a sophisticated form of slavery may be an absolute prerequisite for social control in a world at peace. Peace is slavery. Oh, hey, that kind of makes sense. Hey, that's kind of what happened. Oh. As a practical matter, conversion of the code of military discipline to a euphemized form of enslavement would entail surprisingly little revision. The logical first step would be the adoption of some form of universal military service. Sounds like, Israel, for instance, has universal military service, right? You're forced to join, whereas now they call it a voluntary service. A sophisticated form of slavery is a prerequisite, or maybe an absolute prerequisite for social control in a world at peace. Now, notice what they said here. As a practical matter, conversion of the code of military discipline to a euphemized form of enslavement would entail surprisingly little revision. In other words, it would be very easy to transform our legal system of law over to the Uniform Military Code. Really, really simple, honestly. I mean, all you're talking about is a permanent state of military rule, which we're already under, added to that and essentially a martial law situation. A total lack of choice, a pure causality is what that is referring to. When it comes to postulating a credible substitute for war, remember, a simulation, capable of directing human behavior patterns in behalf of social organization, few options suggest themselves. Like its political function, the motivational function of war requires the existence of a genuinely menacing social enemy. The principal difference is that for purposes of motivating basic allegiance, as distinct from accepting political authority, for purposes of motivating basic allegiance, which is distinct from accepting political authority, the alternative enemy must imply a more immediate, tangible, and directly felt threat of destruction. It must justify the need for taking and paying a blood price in wide areas of human concern. In this respect, the possible enemies noted earlier would be insufficient. One exception might be, listen to this, folks, one exception might be the environmental pollution model, if the danger to society it posed was genuinely imminent. The fictional models of climate change, of environmental pollution, etc., would have to carry the weight of extraordinary conviction, underscored with a not inconsiderable actual sacrifice of life. Why are the fish dying? Why are there fish kills? Why are the starfish dying? Why is so much death happening? Why are sheep freezing suddenly overnight in 20 inches of snow? Why is there an ice age coming? Why? Well, the construction of an up-to-date mythological or religious structure for this purpose would present difficulties in our era, but must certainly be considered. Well, I think it was considered and done. Remember, this report was, I think, back in the 70s, maybe? Can't remember. So there you go. There's your religion of climate change. Science has become religion. Science has no credibility whatsoever at this point. It's gone. There's no science anymore. Science. What is science but taking something beautiful, killing it, deconstructing it, taking it down to its atom, level, its molecular level, its quantum level, if that even exists, and ensuring complete outer destruction in order to understand how it works. Well, how does something live? Let's kill it to find out. How does something live? Let's kill it. Kill it! Destroy it! Kill it so that we can know how it works. That's science. Now, this goes back, my friends, to something I'm actually familiar with because I did work in the industry. Something called games theory. Yes, I worked in Hollywood. I worked on video games. I even worked on those stupid militarized games from SOCOM to Metal Gear Solid, War. What are they called? I can't remember. Anyway, I worked on several of these ones that are popular today, making them as real as possible to completely dumb down and make kids completely unapathetic to killing and blood and guts, that kind of thing. That was my career, and of course I quit that to do what I'm doing today, realizing what effect it had. So on page 54, it says this. It says, games theorists have suggested in other contexts the development of blood games for the effective control of individual aggressive impulses. It is an ironic commentary on the current state of war and peace studies that it was left not to scientists but to the makers of a commercial film to develop a model for this notion on the implausible level of popular melodrama as a ritualized manhunt. More realistically, such a ritual might be socialized in the matter of the Spanish Inquisition and the less formal witch trials of other periods for purposes of social purification, state security, and other rationale, both acceptable and credible to post-war societies. The feasibility of such an updated version of still another ancient institution, though doubtful, is considerably less fanciful than the wishful notion of many peace planners. Did you know you have peace planners out there? That a lasting condition of peace can be brought about without the most painstaking examination of every possible surrogate for the essential functions of war. What is involved here, in a sense, is the quest for William James's moral equivalent of war. It is also possible that the two functions considered under this heading may be jointly served in the sense of establishing the antisocial for whom a control institution is needed. That's talking about us. Establishing the antisocial for whom a control institution is needed, say like the Truth Movement, like InfoWars. Become a member. Buy our products. Hey, radiation's going to kill you, but fortunately we have a product for that. As the alternative enemy needed to hold society together, the relentless and irreversible advance of unemployability at all levels of society and the similar extension of generalized alienation from accepted values may make some such program necessary even as an adjunct to the war system. As before, we will not speculate on the specific forms this kind of program might take, except to note that there is again ample precedent in the treatment meted out to disfavored, allegedly menacing ethnic groups in certain societies during certain historical periods. Who could that be talking about? Well, you see, they've turned in what can only be called paradoxical. They've actually turned now the white person, the typical white man, into the enemy. even though still in the Constitution it says that only white persons are citizens, and I don't, I'm not just saying that. We have a white country. It is Barack Obama is actually a white person according to law. I didn't say his skin color is white. That's not a requirement to be a white person. It has to do with your bloodline, and Barack Obama is a direct descendant of the kings of England, thus President of the United States. Hillary Clinton, direct descendant. Bill Clinton, direct descendant. Henry Ford, i.e. Leslie Lynch King, a direct descendant of the kings of England. It's a family bloodline. Look it up in the dictionaries. It says skin color has nothing to do with being a white person. It's a status based on blood, not skin color. Peace planners. I love that. I'm a peace planner. In order to sustain peace, we must kill people. I think we should have public executions to ensure commerce is free-flowing and to ensure the legitimacy of government and its massive budget for military spending. That's what we need. We need to kill people. Or at least make it look like we're killing people so that they're constantly threatened and therefore justify the menace that is the centralized, the central military, the very thing that was the biggest complaint in the Declaration of Independence was, of course, a centralized military. But we need to have that, and therefore we need to cause all this crazy shit happening and show it constantly in the media, just like in 1984. I'm a peace planner, you see. Continued. The existence of an accepted external menace, then, is essential to social cohesiveness, as well as to the acceptance of political authority. Let me say that again, because, what's the biggest complaint that I hear? What is the same? Every one of you that contacts me, which I love, by the way. I love the emails, I love the responses, and the one that I especially love is, hey, thanks to you, I did not vaccinate my child. Thanks to your documentary, thanks to your radio show, I did not vaccinate my child. He's healthy, he's strong, never gets sick. While the other kids are out with these, meningitis, my kid's strong. That's the kind of email that I love. That is the thing that keeps me going, and they're very few and far between. Just like each of you are very few and far between. The existence of an accepted external menace, then, is essential to social cohesiveness as well as to the acceptance of political authority. In other words, we're all talking, we're like, hey, we want to get out. We just want to be left alone. We want to go live over here in peace, real peace, love, charity, all that, following the law of nature, following God's law, respecting each other. No one's wealthy. No one, we don't even need money over here because we're at peace. We grow food for each other. We are family, not just friends. We're something beyond what we call society in the legal sense. But you see, we can't break free. We're like atoms. Cohesive atoms that just cannot be broken free no matter what frequency is blasted upon us. We just can't break free of the mass because there's always this external threat. The external menace that half the time doesn't even exist. The existence of an accepted external menace then is essential to social cohesiveness. Otherwise people would just go off and do their own thing. They'd say, no, I'm not going to pay you tax. You're not doing anything. Oh, well, yeah, there's no enemy. What do you do? You have to create an enemy to to get that cohesiveness so people pay taxes so that you can continue and keep doing your black budgets and everything. I mean, come on. We're not going to accept your political authority. You don't do it. What do? You do now. Terrorist attack. Oh, sorry. Machine guns in the subways. Sorry, sir, you can't get to your house without showing ID. Sorry. No, checkpoints. Okay. You got me. You're doing something. You're protecting me. You know, I'm in Utah, but that which happened in Las Vegas, therefore might happen in Utah. And therefore, I need you're doing something, so I accept your political authority, and I will continue to be cohesive in social, and therefore we never break free. And by we, I mean you who are listening, you who know that you're living in a very deranged, horrible society. And, you know, one of my favorite quotes, it just goes like this. It is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. No measure of health at all to be well adjusted, to love your job, in other words, to love your position in such a sick society as this. The menace must be believable. It must be of a magnitude consistent with the complexity of the society threatened, and it must appear at least to infect somehow the entire society. Well, you know, the entire society. We're all United States citizens. So if the United States, Washington, D.C. alone is threatened, then we're all threatened. You see, that's the problem with this national citizenship. It means that whatever measures are taken to combat the terrorists will be, of course, it will affect us without our choice. Now, the report also gives alternative possibilities to control us, like the purposeful control of reproduction, i.e., population control, through both popular, legally binding, and covert means. What does it say? From an ecological standpoint, it says, considering the shortcomings of war as a mechanism of selective population control, let me say that again. Considering the shortcomings of war as a mechanism of selective population control, that's not saying that war is not a mechanism of population control. It's saying that it's got shortcomings, You can't control who gets, you gotta send, you can't make it look so much like the generals and the captains don't get killed, but all the peons, the pawns, you gotta have some higher order, rank and file get killed, but you gotta make it look like it's legitimate, right? Legitimacy, it has to look real. It has to appear genuine. And, what can you say? War is certainly a mechanism of selective population control, though it has shortcomings. It might appear that devising substitutes for this function should be comparatively simple. What is that saying? It might appear that devising substitutes for the mechanism of selective population control of war, it seems like devising substitutes for that function should be comparatively simple. Oh, really? So tell me, then, besides war, how are you going to depopulate us? It says, schematically, this is so, but the problem of timing the transition to a new ecological balancing device, you mean like vaccines? Makes the feasibility of substitution less certain. How about the airport scanner machines? Every time you go through there, oh my God, the backscatter machines? We're going to talk a little bit about that, by the way. It must be remembered that the limitations of war in this function is entirely eugenic. So war is a mechanism of selective population control, and that is eugenics. So you're saying that all wars are eugenic. You're saying the real foundational reason of war is eugenics. War has not been genetically progressive. but a system of gross population control to preserve the species. It cannot fairly be faulted. A system of gross population control, killing people to preserve the species, cannot be fairly faulted. Oh, you want to ask yourself why there is not a revolt tomorrow? Huh? And as has been pointed out, the nature of war is itself in transition. In other words, we went from World War situations where it was actually a legitimate war. The last legitimate, well, so-called legitimate war approved by Congress. We don't have a legitimate Congress, so it's kind of hard to say that after the Civil War. But then we went to the Vietnam-style, CIA-backed, secret type of war where all over North worked for the CIA as well as most of the soldiers. And, they even have a movie now with Tom Cruise right now. Can't remember what it's called, but it's, my God, it's a direct admission, a true story, or the true story of how the CIA was running frickin' opium, out of, through the Vietnam quote-unquote war, even though it wasn't a war. We haven't had a declared war. There's no declared war since World War II, and I don't really, again, that is no different than the complaint against the king. Why are there troops coming into our lands, our streets, our states, if there's no war? Well, because war is peace, you dumbass. Have you figured that out by now? Okay. So, war is eugenics, and gross population control through war, can't be faulted as a legitimate way to depopulate. Okay, thanks for your opinion. The nature of war is itself in transition. Let's see. Current trends in warfare, the increased strategic bombing of civilians, and the greater military importance now attached to the destruction of sources of supply as opposed to purely military bases and personnel strongly suggest that a truly qualitative improvement is in the making. Now, isn't it funny that only when they decide that they're going to improve something do they admit what everybody already knows but have denied in the past? What are they admitting? Well, that we carpet bomb civilians and don't give a shit, and that, we don't focus on purely military bases. We have no problem hitting civilian schools, churches, anything. It's okay, you see, because we've transitioned. The nature of war is itself in transition. We went from legitimized war to illegal occupation, a nation building, to, the economic hitman. Everybody's familiar with what's his name. I mean, here... So we're going to improve on our past indiscretions. But first we have to admit that we have a bad system before we can make it better. So here it is. A truly qualitative improvement is in the making. All right. So there's no question but that a universal requirement that procreation be limited to the products of artificial insemination would provide a fully adequate substitute control for population levels. A universal requirement that procreation be limited to the products of artificial insemination would provide a fully adequate substitute control for population levels. Are you hearing that, folks? Such a reproductive system would, of course, have the added advantage of being susceptible of direct eugenic management. Did I tell you, by the way, that the word genetics is nothing more and nothing less than the modern eugenic movement? That genetics is, in fact, eugenics. It's the same people, same groups under different names. That's what genetics is, folks. It's not just genetically altering you. It's not just genetically altering your food. It's eugenically wiping you off the face of the earth, you and your family, because, that's popular. It's either that or war. What do you want, man? Would you rather die slowly and not know you're being killed, or would you rather die quickly in the bloody war? You see, we, as peace planners, we have to consider these things. Peace planning is very difficult. We have to make difficult decisions on behalf of our fellow human capital management. We have to make horrible decisions. We eugenicists, we either have to go to war to kill a bunch of people, or we have to eugenically alter the entire world. It's predictable further development, conception and embryonic growth taking place wholly under laboratory conditions. It only makes sense. Would extend these controls to their logical conclusion. The ecological function of war under these circumstances would not only be superseded, but surpassed in effectiveness. See, the logic here, and it is logical, you don't need reason to be logical. You don't need sanity to even be logical. It's just a dialectic. That's what eugenics is a dialectic, right? The dialectic here is that if you control population, then you never need to go to war. If you have control over the population growth and birth rate, then you don't need war. And so in a sort of clandestine way, the peace planners are basically, presenting you with their choice of how they're going to achieve peace, a permanent state of peace, under a continuous threat of war, and the only way they can do that is through population control, which, of course, war is. To prevent war and keep peace, we can instead make a commercial industry out of birth. We can control the genetics, we can control there would be no retarded babies because we could abort them. Even if we miss it, we can have afterbirth abortions. We can do all kinds of things to make these subservient little children. You see, that is peace. Peace requires, everything has an opposite. Remember that. You can't know one thing unless you know the other. See, the problem is we don't know, in our generation, we don't know war. We've never experienced an actual war. We've only been propagandized the crap that from Iraq to, Afghanistan, these things that are not wars, where they'd have no Navy, Air Force, or Marines, right? Because the water. No, yeah, it's just a ridiculous bullying of the Middle East, on behalf of Israel, or i.e. the Zionist Congress, International Jewish Congress. That is what it is. Greater Israel is being built right before our eyes. So. Well, let's just keep reading. I think you understand what I'm saying here. It's like you can't have one thing without at least the threat of the other. You can't have peace without war. Do you not understand that? There's no such thing as peace unless there's its opposite, which is war. There is no reason to call anything peace unless there is at least the threat of its opposite, which is war. You see, war is peace. Peace is war. It's just it's what you call a sliding scale of commerce. That's it. They're in the same scale. Just like I call something low or high, right? War or peace, low or high on the commerce scale. It's the same. They're not separate things. They're opposites. They're 0 and 1. And as far as profits, they're gold and silver, right? Gold is war, silver is free-flowing commerce. But war is very profitable, right? I'm disgusted by this, but I'm going to continue. It's predictable further development, conception, and embryonic growth taking place wholly under laboratory conditions would extend these controls to their logical conclusion. The ecological foundation of war under these circumstances would not only be superseded, but surpassed in effectiveness. This would be better than war. Population control would be better than war. You could control it, whereas war is just a bunch of killing. The indicated intermediate step, total control of conception with a variant of the ubiquitous quote-unquote pill via water supplies or certain essential food stuffs, offset by a controlled quote-unquote antidote, who only the elite have, is already under development. What? Is already under development? This was 1970 something? Total control of conception with a variant of the ubiquitous birth control pill via water supplies or certain essential foodstuffs, offset by controlled antidote, is already under development 45 years ago. There would appear to be no foreseeable need to revert to any of the outmoded practices referred to in the previous section, such as infanticide, etc., as there might have been if the possibility of transition to peace had arisen 2 generations ago. The real question here, therefore, does not concern the viability of this war substitute, but the political problems involved in bringing it about. It cannot be established while the war system is still in effect. The reason for this is simple. Excess population is tar material. How can you have a state of war and birth population control through whatever, poisoning, radiation, etc.? How can you have both when you need people to die for public execution purposes, for propaganda purposes, in war? You can't have 2 such dramatic population control systems going at the same time. That just wouldn't make sense. As a peace planner, I can't have that would just be too much, just too much control. As long as any society must contemplate even a remote possibility of war, it must maintain a maximum supportable population, even when doing so critically aggravates an economic liability. This is paradoxical in view of war's role in reducing excess population, but it is readily understood. I'm sorry, but for some reason I keep saying Henry Kissinger's face. This paradoxical in view of war's role in reducing excess population. War's role in reducing excess population. It is readily understood. War controls the general population level. But the ecological interest of any single society lies in maintaining its hegemony vis-a-vis other societies. Are you hearing this, folks? Let's look up the word hegemony. I know what that means, but I want to make sure I say the right thing here. Hegemony. Preponderant influence or authority over others. Domination. What is the whole purpose of this, folks? Is it not hegemony? Is it not domination? Is it not to keep people with the feeling, the patriotism, the notion that they need this central government, even though it's peacetime, we need such a military apparatus? Isn't that the purpose of all of this, is to keep the hegemonic ability of the United States to have this thing that, again, was the number 1 complaint in the Declaration of Independence, a standing army in peacetime? Is this not the reason for all of this? For all of this blood sacrifice? this eugenic plan of the peace planners. I love it. I love it. You see, again, I don't know. I don't even know what to say. I'm at a loss to put any kind of there's no. This is something. What we're hearing doesn't have spin. I mean, you're hearing this is. I don't need to spin it to make it sound as evil as it is. That's my point. War controls the general population level. I don't need to change that sentence in any way to make it any more effective than it already is. War controls the general population, but the ecological interest of any single society lies in maintaining its hegemony over other or like other societies. Our hegemony over other societies. Our power. Our military force. The obvious analogy can be seen in any free enterprise economy. Practices damaging to the society as a whole, both competitive and monopolistic, are abetted by the conflicting economic motives of individual capital interests. The obvious precedent can be found in the seemingly irrational political difficulties which have blackened universal adoption of simple birth control methods. Irrational political difficulties blocking the universal adoption of simple birth control. Nations desperately in need of increasing unfavorable production-consumption ratios. Wow. Increasing unfavorable production-consumption ratios. In other words, we need to kill a lot of abort a lot of babies or stop them from being born. Unfavorable production-consumption ratios. My God. Are nevertheless unwilling to gamble their possible military requirements of 20 years hence for this purpose. For God's sake, folks, what did they just say? They said they're unwilling to depopulate their own countries because they need men to die in the other form of population control, which is war. Are you hearing that? This is why I keep telling you, that's all you are, is pawns. You're human capital to be managed. That's what capitalism actually is. How is money created, people? Every time you go to the bank, you create money. Every time you take a loan, you create money. You see, the money is created on your backs. You are backing the currency. Your Social Security, all of this, these investments that you find, these corporations that invest in your birth certificate. Okay, that is what capitalism is. It is monetary debt slavery. This is an open-air prison. Freedom is a franchise. Okay? Peace is war, and peace technically is open commerce, including extortion and exaction to government, tax. Unbelievable, these things that are being said in this report. I mean, they are truly above anything else I've ever heard in my life. If everybody in the United States heard this, I just can't imagine that there wouldn't be an uprising. I mean, I don't know what to say. I don't know how this is secret, or at least kept within the second matrix of the truth movement, right? Where no one's really woken up, but you call it waking up into another matrix, yeah. Okay, so the obvious precedent can be found in seemingly irrational political difficulties which have blocked universal adoption of simple birth control methods. I gotta read this again. Nations desperately in need of increasing unfavorable production-consumption ratios are nevertheless unwilling to gamble their possible military requirements of 20 years hence for this purpose. Again, We will not control our population because your country is so frickin' evil and will attack, as it has 50 different countries since World War II. You will attack us. We need a military. You're asking us to depopulate while we're worried about such a dictative, horrible thing as you and this world government you're creating. You want us to depopulate, and therefore we won't have a military. No, we need those bodies. We need that human capital. We need to manage it. We need to control it. We need to militarize it, and we need to kill them in the military, not at birth. Well, I mean, I guess a lab rat could certainly, justify thanking God for its life, even though it will probably suffer for most of it and die because of unnecessary testing. I mean, I guess you could say that depopulation through war is somehow better than depopulation through birth control. If you're a psychopath, you could say that. I mean, yeah, as a peace planner, I could certainly say that. Unilateral population control, as practiced in ancient Japan and in other isolated societies, is out of the question in today's world. Since the eugenic solution, i.e. genetics solution, cannot be achieved until the transition to the peace system takes place, and I kind of get the feeling that we're in that peace system with all these threats of war, war meaning peace. I think we have been transitioned into that system, and I think all the nations are partaking in that system by constantly threatening each other so that each system has a mutual threat, a foreign threat that it can show the people, including North Korea, including, there's going to be threat of war and more threats and more threats and more threats. There might even be war, if this starts catching on. Well, then they're going to distract you with a real war and depopulate you that way. It's an inevitable. And in my opinion, depopulation is inevitable because you're still sitting on your ass listening to this. It's inevitable. I'm still sitting on my ass. I'm just talking about it. Am I doing anything about it? No, I'm not doing anything about it. I'm just as guilty and worthless and caught in the matrix, the secondary matrix, as everybody else. I'll admit it. I'll admit it, and that's why I say it's inevitable. I'm trying to pay my pittance. I'm trying to educate people for all the things that I was wrong about, all the Alex Jonesian, InfoWarrior, we are change, truth, libertarian, all that crap, volunteerism, all of that crap, it's, I'm trying to repair that in people's heads and have been repairing that in my own head for a long time. And that's where the Bible came in, I'll say it. I don't mind saying it. I don't mind being chastised for it. The Bible is what got me through. It was the final piece of the puzzle. It's not just the final piece of the puzzle, it is the puzzle. Since the eugenic solution cannot be achieved until the transition to a peace system takes place, which I'd say it has, and it asks, why not wait? We have all the time in the world. We're a generational thing. Our sons are going to carry on. We are a bloodline family. We are the posterity. One must qualify the inclination to agree. As we noted earlier, a real possibility of an unprecedented global crisis of insufficiency exists today, which the war system may not be able to forestall. If this should come to pass before an agreed-upon transition to peace were completed, the result might be irrevocably disastrous. Now, wait a minute. An agreed-upon transition to peace? Who's agreeing? Who is it that's agreeing to this agreed-upon transition to, quote-unquote, a peace model? Well, I would say the nations, which is why we have the United Nations, which is why all we're becoming global citizens, right? An agreed-upon transition to commerce, which is peace. worldwide cashless society where everybody has a digital ID and is recognized not by anything that's fictional, but by your own genetic makeup through biometrics? Is this starting to sound like, hey, maybe this report is coming true faster than we would like to admit? Oh, but this report's a fraud. It can't be proven. It has no legitimate source. Blah, 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 blah. Listen to what it's saying. Compare it to what has happened and what is happening. That's really because someone wrote this. Maybe that someone doesn't have a credential. Maybe that someone is a psychopath. But I guarantee you, folks, that if I'm reading this, guess who else it has it available to them? Right? I mean, all the psychopaths in the CFR, all the psychopaths in government have access to this if I have access to it. Is it legitimate? Well, what do you mean? I mean, what does that even mean? Is something that I write legitimate? Well, nobody in the professional industry would think so, because I don't have their credentials. I'm not in their syndicalist organizations. I'm not legitimate. Why the fuck are you listening to me? If you won't take this report as legitimate, why are you taking my shit as legitimate? Why are you taking this station as legitimate? Why are you here is the real question. And why are you letting this shit take place? That's the real question. If this should come to pass before an agreed-upon transition to peace were completed, the result might be irrevocably disastrous. There is clearly no solution to this dilemma. It is a risk which must be taken, but it tends to support a view that if a decision is made to eliminate the war system, it were better done sooner than later. Now again, let's break that down. If the decision is made to eliminate the war system, it is better done sooner than later. What does that mean? Either you have a war to end all wars, or you get rid of the war system and you bring in genetics, population control. The eugenics of this century. I mean, which is what's happening. Maybe I didn't mention that. Earlier back in the report on page 42, it gives us some more wisdom from the peace planners. Another secondary ecological trend bearing on projected population growth is the regressive effect of certain medical advances. Pestilence, for example, is no longer an important factor in population control. The problem of increased life expectancy has been aggravated. The problem of increased life expectancy. See, increased life expectancy is a problem. These advances also pose a potentially more sinister problem in that undesirable genetic traits that were formerly self-liquidating are now medically maintained. In other words, you had your disappointments room where you threw your retarded children and didn't show them to the public. They grew up in Harry Potter's closet, right? And they were never allowed to breed. And even some of our most famous judges that are somehow loved have some very disturbing decisions in the courts about eugenics and how certain lines of people should not be allowed to reproduce. That was Marshall, I think. It's pretty disgusting to read the history of our courts when it comes to eugenics, I got to tell you. So there's a problem. It's called increased life expectancy. Well, you know, pharmaceuticals are taking care of that, I'd say. Undesirable genetic traits are being maintained. In other words, we're allowing to be birthed genetic mutations. God, this is sick. Many diseases that were once fatal at pre-procreational ages are now cured. What are they saying here? Oh, these assholes have cured diseases that kill children. Now children grow up, despite the disease, live to reproduce. That's a problem. It's a problem that childhood diseases are being cured. Well, I'd say that's why we have now modern diseases such as early onset Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and other preanal diseases. And, of course, let's not forget childhood diabetes and, the big one, cancer. Yes, I survived cancer, you fucks. I survived it. Many diseases that were once fatal at pre-procreational ages are now cured. Childhood diseases are cured, and that is a problem. The effect of this development is to perpetuate undesirable susceptibilities and mutations. You see, children are, in fact, undesirable. That's why we like childhood diseases. They're fun. They kill, and they don't allow children to grow up enough to procreate. It seems clear, and guess what? You know, if we're able to start manipulating the genes, right? If we can truly eugenically, genetically control it, so that more kids are born with, say, something like Zika or sickle cell anemia, or any child of the modern ones that never existed in any situation before. Never existed in history before some of these diseases. Well, then, all the better, because then we can use that as an excuse to kill more children by genetically saying, oh, I'm sorry, your children will be born with this genetic disease, and we don't allow that in this country. So you have control on both ends. If you retard more children, then you can abort more children. It seems clear that a new quasi-eugenic function of war is now in process of formation that will have to be taken into account in any transition plan. For the time being, the Department of Defense appears to have recognized such factors. Oh, really? Maybe someone should be looking for that recognition. It's in the records, as has been demonstrated by the planning underway by the RAND Corporation to cope with the breakdown in the ecological balance anticipated after a thermonuclear war. Wow, so RAND Corporation. Planning underway by RAND Corporation to cope with the breakdown in the ecological balance anticipated after a thermonuclear war. Ecological balance, is that more colored people than white people? What does that mean? What does that mean? More mutations because of thermonuclear war? What is this eugenically speaking? The department has also begun to stockpile birds, for example, against the expected proliferation of radiation-resistant insects, etc. Wow. This report is becoming something quite different than what we expected it to be. It's much more diverse and advanced in its peace planning than we could ever have imagined. So, let's go back to this notion of a volunteer or service-oriented military and a non-violent military structure as well. Why, for instance, do we have military bases in every state? Well, the Liber Code, the rules of war, the rules of conquest, the rules of the victors of war says that the presence of a foreign military base represents the marshals of law, that martial law is in place, or military rule is in place. Okay, so what state do you live in? And which one of those 50 states does not have a military base in it? Right? I mean, the presence of a military building or base is representative of martial law. So, yeah, I don't know what to say. The fact that the U.S. military is based in every one of the 50 states as a foreign nation, a foreign company, a foreign corporation, Washington, a district, right? That shows, and the fact that we're in 192 other countries with military bases is something else to talk about when it comes to the Liber Code. All right? I mean, that means we're occupying all those countries illegally. A standing army, one of the great complaints of the Declaration of Independence. The greatest threat to the sovereignty of any nation, country, or people. That's, I mean, you're in it. That's the United States. Let's see. Sociological is, I think, one of the last categories here. It's a long report, so I encourage you to read the whole thing. Of the many functions of war we have found convenient to group together in this classification, two are critical. In a world of peace, the continuing stability of society will require... Now again, this is the peace planning. In a world of quote-unquote peace, meaning free-flowing commerce all over the world, controlled by the few, the families, the continuing stability of society will require, one, an effective substitute for military institutions that can neutralize destabilizing social elements, and, number two, a credible motivational surrogate for war that can ensure social cohesiveness. Well, what is a credible motivational surrogate for war? How about terrorist attacks that are, of course, not real terrorists, but the only terrorist it's defined as, which is government in dictionaries. Okay, well, that's a perfectly motivational surrogate for war, to constantly see on television, just like in 1984, things like the Las Vegas quote-unquote massacre, the Boston bombing, the school shootings, Columbine. All of those things. Constant barrage. And at this point, who needs even, then you've got ISIS, then you've got all these other... At this point, do we even need a foreign threat? Are we going through another experiment that maybe we can phase out the foreign threat since they don't have a military, unorganized militia, they don't have anything, no planes, no, they don't have access to water. The first is an essential element of social control. The second is a basic mechanism for adapting individual human drives to the needs of society. The Las Vegas shooting and the Boston bombing and any other thing that you see, whether it's real or Memorex, whether it's fake or an actor, a bunch of actors called crisis actors, either way, I got to be honest, I stopped caring. It's not that I don't care that anybody was hurt or not hurt. That's not what I'm saying. I don't care if it's real or not when it comes to the agenda. That doesn't matter. As long as it looks to be legitimate, then it's doing its job. With all the holes in all the official stories, as long as those holes don't reach enough people, as long as it stays within the little truth movement matrix, the side matrix for people who just can't get along in the normal one, well, then everything's good. Good. We have something to talk about, sells our products, we get together in our groups, we talk, and assholes like me get on the radio, talk, but nothing ever happens. Nothing gets done. Nobody does anything. Because we're all expecting the shock jocks. Well, now that he said it, it must be true. It must be okay. Someone must be doing something about it. Because it came out of Alex Jones's mouth, something must be being done about it. Do you know nothing has been done about anything that Alex Jones has ever talked about? And that's because we're stuck in our own false truth matrix. I'm telling you, it's so obvious. Adapting individual human drives to the needs of society. That is what this is all about. Most proposals that address themselves explicitly or otherwise to the post-war problem of controlling the society, alienated, turn to some variant of the Peace Corps or the so-called Job Corps for a solution. So what are they talking about? An effective substitute for military institutions that can neutralize destabilizing social elements, such as the quote-unquote truth movement. Well, how about Job Corps? How about Peace Corps? The socially disaffected. That's us, folks. The socially disaffected. We can't fucking handle being in the fiction. We cannot be fictional characters anymore, so we're socially disaffected. The economically unprepared, the psychologically unconformable, the hardcore delinquents, the incorrigible subversives, and the rest of the unemployable, because I'm not socially acceptable, are seen as somehow transformed by the disciplines of a service modeled on military precedent into more or less dedicated social service workers. Now, Alex Jones, he's going to say, they're going to put you in FEMA camps, blah, 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 they're going to kill your family, they're going to do blah, blah, blah. No, they're going to... they're going to put you in the Job Corps and the Peace Corps. They're going to make you wear little pink jumpsuits and fucking do public service work. That's what they're going to do. That's your FEMA camp. You're already in a FEMA camp, you idiots. That's open air prison. That's what jurisdiction means. Open air prison for debtors. This is so funny. The presumption also informs the otherwise hard-headed ratiocination of the unarmed forces plan. Now, that's quoted, unarmed forces. You might want to go look up what unarmed forces are, because part of that was in the Obama bill, the healthcare bill, Obama's private army. You have Monsanto and other companies now having their own private little military, private little police force. What is the unarmed forces? Wow. Somehow transformed we will be, us subversives, us delinquents, us psychologically unconformable, by a service modeled on military presence. Well, what does that mean? What are they admitting here? That the purpose for military training and all that is to break you down. It's to break you down and make you more socially oriented, to make you love your country, to make you kill without consciousness, and in the name of service to your quote unquote king, your nation, your the standing army, right? I mean, so again, they have to admit that that's what military does. It transforms. Oh, my kid's a bad kid. He doesn't get along in school. He has all these problems, just like I did when I was a kid, because I didn't fit in anywhere. I hated school. I hated the kids at school. They were so immature. It's like, give me some real knowledge. But no, I'm a bad kid because I don't fit in. Send me to military school. Yeah, that's right. Military school will cure the socially disaffected, will cure the economically unprepared, the psychologically unconformable. You see, that's the purpose of military. So if you can militarize people but into unarmed forces, people like us, the unincorrigible, well, then, you got it. Another possible surrogate for the control of potential enemies, that's us as well, of society, is the reintroduction in some form consistent with modern technology and political processes of slavery. And that's what we read before tomorrow. So if you're not willing to go into a social service job that's militarized but unarmed, well, then your option is slavery. So there again, you have peace, you volunteer for unarmed forces, or you have war, slavery. You don't volunteer, and you do the work of the slave. This is causality. This is the false choice, right? Well, folks, that brings us to the end of today's rant. Hope you enjoyed it. Is that the right word? I really hope it pissed you off. I really hope it got you going. I hope it got your nads pumping, because I don't know what else will. And so, my fellow degenerates, my fellow incorrigible subservives, my delinquents, my brotherhood of the psychologically unconformable, I bid you adieu for today and invite you back next Sunday and listen to the whole slew of hosts here on UCY.TV, And on that note, take care and enjoy the next 2 weeks of, you guessed it, more news on the Las Vegas shooting. Take care.